He walked into the dealership with calm confidence, his shoes clicking lightly on the shiny floor. The sun outside made the cars gleam even more brightly, and the smell of polish and new leather filled the air. People were moving around talking to customers, handing over keys and jotting down notes. He looked around slowly, taking in the rows of cars, each one spotless and arranged perfectly. There was something about this place that felt both familiar and strange, like it had a life of its own. He approached the first car he liked, leaning slightly to look inside. The dashboard was sleek and the leather smelled rich and new. He was genuinely curious, asking questions about features, performance, and the story behind the car. He wanted to learn, not just buy. His voice was calm and polite, and he smiled often, making it clear he respected the people around him. Customers and staff noticed him, some giving him brief glances, some not paying much attention. Then the manager noticed him. The manager was busy, moving quickly between salespeople and customers, his attention divided. When he saw this man, he paused for a moment, sizing him up. Something about him didn't fit what the manager expected. Maybe it was the calmness, maybe it was the quiet confidence, or maybe it was something he couldn't put into words. But immediately he felt protective over his dealership. Without thinking fully, he decided this man was out of place. The manager walked toward him, stepping with purpose. He spoke in a firm tone that left no room for discussion. "Excuse me, sir. I think you should leave. This isn't a place for wandering around without purpose." His eyes scanned the man as if looking for any sign that he belonged. The man looked at him, not angry, just calm and collected. "I was just looking at the cars," he said politely. "I have questions about this one." The manager shook his head, raising his voice slightly. "I don't care. You need to leave. Now." His tone was harsh, as though he was protecting something precious, something that belonged only to him. He was sure of his decision and felt justified. People nearby started to notice, a few shifting uncomfortably, unsure what was happening. The man's calm response did not change the manager's mind. He glanced around, his gaze steady. "I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but I cannot allow you to stay if you're not serious about buying." The manager, misinterpreting this as disrespect, took a step closer, making it clear he was not backing down. "I said leave now." Other customers looked on. Some whispered to each other, noticing the tension. The man smiled slightly, not with amusement, but as a gesture of patience. "I will leave," he said softly, "but I hope one day you can see that judging someone by appearance is not always right." The manager waved his hand, dismissing him. "Get out." And with that, the man turned, walking toward the exit, calm and measured. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply left, making the manager feel victorious. The staff went back to their tasks, and the manager returned to his office, believing he had handled the situation well. Outside, the man took a deep breath. The air felt different after the tense encounter inside. He made a discreet phone call from his car. The person on the other end greeted him warmly, discussing final details that had been pending for days. The man smiled, nodding, listening carefully. After a few minutes, he hung up, a quiet satisfaction settling in. He had just completed the purchase of the very dealership he had been thrown out of. He leaned back in his seat, reflecting on what had just happened. The irony was sharp, almost bitterly amusing. The manager, who had treated him so poorly, had no idea who he was. The man could have reacted in anger, could have confronted the manager on the spot, but he chose patience instead. There was a lesson in that, and he felt it deeply. He thought about the manager, busy running a dealership he didn't yet own. He imagined the surprise, the shock, the moment the truth would hit. But he also thought about the staff, who were unaware, moving through their day without realizing the change that had just occurred. Everything would soon be different. But for now, the dealership was the same, bustling with life, filled with the scent of new cars and polished floors. The man decided to go home, letting the moment rest for a while. He wanted to plan carefully, to approach the situation with thought and care. Change needed to be precise and effective, not rushed or emotional. He could already imagine the look on the manager's face when he returned, the disbelief and the awkwardness. But he also imagined the potential for understanding, for growth if it was handled properly. At home, he reviewed his notes, thinking about strategies, approaches, and policies he could implement. The dealership was more than just a business. It was a place where people worked, where customers came with dreams and expectations. It deserved fair leadership, respect, and integrity. He wanted to ensure that everyone would be treated fairly without bias, regardless of appearance or assumptions. He remembered how calm he had remained earlier, how he had chosen patience over confrontation. That calm had served him well, allowing him to complete a major purchase without conflict. He knew that the real challenge was ahead, not in buying the dealership but in leading it with fairness and honesty. He went to sleep that night with a sense of purpose. Tomorrow he would return, but he would do so with strategy, clarity, and a mindset focused on change. The manager would learn, the staff would adjust, and the dealership would grow under his leadership. He knew it wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't happen overnight, but he felt ready for the challenge. Meanwhile, at the dealership, the manager rested in his office, unaware of the twist of fate that had just occurred. He thought about his day, about the people he had encountered, and about the decisions he had made. Pride and a sense of security filled him. He believed he had protected his territory well. Little did he know the very person he had dismissed was now the one holding the keys to his professional future. Staff carried on, moving cars, answering calls, talking to customers. Everything seemed normal, routine, as if nothing had changed. But change was coming, quiet but unstoppable. A new chapter was about to begin, one that would challenge assumptions, push boundaries, and redefine how respect and fairness were shown within the walls of the dealership. The man, patient and determined, had already begun his journey as the owner. He knew that true leadership required more than authority. It required understanding, empathy, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The encounter with the manager was just the beginning, a small spark that would ignite the larger changes to come. He reflected on his own life, the experiences that shaped him, the obstacles he had overcome, and the lessons he had learned. Every step had prepared him for this moment, and now, standing on the threshold of a new chapter, he felt ready to turn what could have been a negative experience into an opportunity for growth and transformation. The night grew quiet. Outside, the city lights twinkled, cars moved along the streets, and the world went on. Inside the man's home, he made plans, thought carefully about every next step, and rested with confidence. He knew that when he returned to the dealership, he would not just be entering as an owner, but as someone with a mission to change the culture, to create a space of respect, fairness, and integrity. And so, the first part of the story closes with tension and anticipation, patience and planning. The stage is set for the confrontation, the revelation, and the transformation that are yet to come. The dealership is the same in appearance, but its future is poised for change. Led by a man whose calm and thoughtful approach would soon leave a lasting impact. After the man left the dealership, he drove quietly for a few blocks, his mind focused but calm. The city streets were busy, cars moving in all directions, people walking on sidewalks, and traffic lights blinking in rhythm. It was an ordinary evening for everyone else, but for him, everything had changed in ways nobody could yet see. He parked his car in a quiet lot and took out his phone, checking the final confirmation messages. Every detail had been finalized, and the ownership of the dealership was now officially his. He thought back to the manager, the quick judgment, the harsh words, and the sense of authority he had displayed. It was clear the man had acted from assumptions, bias, and a need to feel in control. The irony of the situation made him smile faintly. He had remained calm, yet the manager had no idea who he was dealing with. This thought alone carried a quiet power, not of revenge but of patience and awareness. Sitting in his car, he made a few notes in a small notebook he carried. He wrote down observations from the encounter, ideas for how the dealership could improve, and strategies for leadership. Every word mattered, because this was not just about owning a business. It was about creating an environment where people were treated fairly, and where assumptions did not cloud judgment. The man had always believed that leadership was not about showing dominance or authority, but about listening, observing, and guiding with respect. Today had tested that belief in a very real way. He understood that the manager's behavior, though unfair, was not unusual. Many people made snap judgments every day, not out of cruelty but out of ignorance or habit. Recognizing this, he did not feel anger but rather a determination to correct the system from within. At home, he continued to plan. He looked at organizational charts, employee responsibilities, and customer flow. He made notes about how to improve the dealership's operations, how to create a culture that emphasized fairness, and how to ensure that no one would be judged based on appearances again. He was thoughtful and meticulous, knowing that leadership required both vision and attention to detail. He also reflected on his own experiences with bias and misjudgment. There had been moments in his life where he had been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed. Each of those experiences had taught him patience, resilience, and the importance of empathy. He wanted the dealership to be a place where those lessons could translate into positive change, where employees felt respected and empowered, and where customers were treated with genuine care. The next morning he woke up early, feeling a sense of purpose. The sun was just rising, casting golden light across the city. He reviewed his plans one more time before heading to the dealership. His approach was not impulsive. He knew that any immediate confrontation with the manager could provoke defensiveness rather than understanding. Change needed strategy, clarity, and patience. As he arrived at the dealership, he noticed the usual morning hustle: employees arriving, cars being prepared for test drives, and the manager walking briskly, checking schedules and assignments. The manager's posture was confident, his demeanor protective of his territory. He had no idea that today the dynamics were about to shift completely. The man entered quietly, letting his presence be known gradually. Employees noticed him, some whispering, some stopping their work briefly to look. He smiled politely at each person, establishing warmth and approachability. His calmness and focus made a subtle impact. People who had been accustomed to hierarchy and tension could feel the difference immediately. He waited for the right moment, observing interactions between staff, the manager, and customers. He listened more than he spoke, taking in details about how the dealership functioned, where friction points were, and how people responded to authority. His mind worked like a careful planner, noting everything that could be improved and preserved. Finally, he approached the front desk where a few staff members were handling customer inquiries. He introduced himself formally as the new owner. The effect was immediate. Eyes widened, conversations paused, and a ripple of surprise went through the room. Employees who had no idea about the purchase now looked at him with curiosity, respect, and a hint of caution. When the manager was informed, his reaction was one of disbelief. He had assumed control of the space, felt secure in his position, and now he was faced with someone who had authority, far beyond his own. The man greeted him politely, maintaining a calm demeanor. There was no anger, no ridicule, only clarity and presence. The man recounted the previous day's encounter, not with accusation, but with simple facts. He described how he had been dismissed and how assumptions had influenced judgment. Employees watched quietly, realizing that the power dynamics had shifted completely. The manager's face showed confusion, embarrassment, and a growing awareness of his misjudgment. Rather than escalate the situation, the man outlined his vision for the dealership. He emphasized fairness, inclusivity, and professionalism. He explained that leadership was not about authority alone, but about guiding people, listening to them, and creating an environment where everyone could excel. His words carried weight, not because of force but because of thoughtfulness and sincerity. Staff began to respond. Some nodded in agreement, some felt cautious optimism, and a few realized the potential for positive change. The manager, still stunned, was left to process both the revelation and the guidance. It was clear that he could resist, react defensively, or choose to learn. The man's approach allowed space for growth, offering a chance to acknowledge mistakes and embrace improvement. As the day continued, the man observed operations closely. He made small adjustments, offered suggestions to employees, and encouraged collaboration. He noticed subtle issues, communication gaps, uneven workloads, and areas where assumptions had previously influenced decisions. Each observation became a potential area for positive change. The man also spent time with customers, engaging them in conversation, understanding their needs, and learning how they experienced the dealership. He emphasized respect and attentiveness, showing that leadership extended beyond employees to everyone who interacted with the business. The manager began to reflect quietly. He realized that the encounter the previous day had revealed more than just an error in judgment. It had exposed a deeper need for self-awareness, empathy, and understanding. The man's calm, deliberate, and fair approach challenged his assumptions in a way that could not be ignored. By evening, the atmosphere at the dealership had shifted subtly but noticeably. Employees felt a new energy, a sense of fairness and clarity in expectations. Customers experienced a more attentive approach. The manager, though still processing, recognized the authority and wisdom in the man's approach. The man left the dealership that evening with quiet satisfaction. The day had been productive not because of confrontation, but because of observation, communication, and thoughtful action. He knew that the journey ahead would require patience, consistency, and courage, but the foundation had been laid. He reflected on the irony of the situation. Just a day ago, he had been dismissed and underestimated. Today, he had established leadership and respect without raising his voice or demanding it. His approach demonstrated the power of calm, strategic action, and human-centric leadership. Back at home, he continued to plan for the long term. He wrote down observations, ideas for policies, employee engagement strategies, and customer experience improvements. He was determined to create a culture where fairness, respect, and professionalism were non-negotiable. The city outside continued its rhythm, cars moving, people talking, lights blinking. Life seemed ordinary, but inside the dealership, a transformation had begun. The man understood that true change required more than ownership. It required vision, patience, and consistent action. As night settled, he reviewed every interaction, every observation, and every detail from the day. He felt a growing confidence that the dealership could become a place where assumptions no longer dictated behavior, where leadership was exercised with empathy and clarity, and where every person, regardless of appearance or background, could be respected and valued. And so, the second part of the story ends with anticipation. The revelation has occurred, authority has shifted, and the groundwork for change has been established. The dealership is poised for transformation, and the man's patience, strategic thinking, and calm leadership promise a journey that will challenge assumptions, inspire growth, and reshape the environment for everyone involved. The next morning, the dealership was alive with movement and energy. Cars were being polished, doors opened for prospective buyers, and staff hustled to make sure everything ran smoothly. The manager arrived early, as usual, but today his steps were heavier. There was a sense of unease in his posture, a tension that had not been there before. Something had shifted overnight, though he could not yet identify it fully. The man, now officially the owner, arrived soon after. His presence was calm and commanding, yet approachable. He did not rush or shout. He simply walked through the doors with confidence, observing every detail. Employees noticed him immediately. Some smiled politely, recognizing the authority he now held. Others whispered to one another, curiosity sparkling in their eyes. The atmosphere felt subtly different, a quiet tension beneath the routine. He walked directly to the manager, who had been arranging schedules for the day. The manager froze for a moment, his mind racing to process the situation. The polite smile and calm demeanor of the man in front of him only made the contrast sharper. The owner spoke in a measured tone, recounting the events of the previous day without anger or accusation. He described how he had been asked to leave and how assumptions had influenced the manager's judgment. Employees watched quietly as the conversation unfolded. The manager struggled to find words, caught between embarrassment, disbelief, and the dawning realization of his mistake. He wanted to defend himself, to explain, but the words felt empty. The owner continued, calmly outlining his expectations for the dealership, emphasizing fairness, respect, and professionalism. He spoke about leadership as guidance rather than control, about creating an environment where employees could thrive and customers felt genuinely valued. The manager listened, his mind slowly shifting from defensiveness to reflection. He realized that the authority he had wielded before was now tempered by understanding, and that his actions had been influenced by bias. The weight of this recognition was uncomfortable but necessary. The owner gave him a moment to absorb the message before moving on, encouraging employees to step forward with questions or concerns. Staff members began to speak up, timidly at first, then with more confidence. They shared observations about challenges in the dealership, communication gaps, and experiences with customers. The owner listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions to clarify details. His approach was inclusive and patient, making people feel heard and valued. Slowly, the environment shifted from tension to collaboration, and the manager began to see the potential for growth and improvement. As the day progressed, the owner made small, thoughtful adjustments. He rearranged workflow slightly to reduce bottlenecks, clarified responsibilities to avoid confusion, and encouraged open communication among the team. His presence was not authoritarian. It was a guide, showing the way forward while allowing employees to contribute their ideas. The manager observed, learning from the approach, recognizing the difference between control and leadership. Customers arriving at the dealership were met with warmth and attentiveness. The owner made a point to interact with them personally, asking about their needs, listening to their stories, and showing genuine interest. Staff noticed the change in energy, the subtle shift in morale. They began to mirror his behavior, realizing that respect and patience could create a positive atmosphere that affected everyone, from colleagues to customers. The manager, initially rigid and defensive, began to participate in discussions more openly. He started to understand that leadership required humility and self-awareness. The encounter from the previous day, once a source of pride in his perceived authority, now served as a mirror reflecting the areas he needed to grow. The owner's calm and consistent guidance had created an opportunity for learning and improvement. During a team meeting in the afternoon, the owner outlined his vision for the dealership. He spoke about inclusivity, fairness, and integrity. He emphasized that decisions should be based on observation, understanding, and respect rather than assumptions or bias. Employees listened intently, feeling the sincerity and thoughtfulness behind his words. The manager, sitting quietly at the edge of the room, began to internalize the message, understanding that leadership was more than authority. It was influence, guidance, and accountability. Throughout the day, the owner continued to observe interactions, noting how employees responded to customers, how tasks were managed, and where improvements could be made. His approach was deliberate, balancing observation with gentle intervention. He recognized strengths, acknowledged efforts, and provided constructive feedback where needed. The manager, though initially hesitant, began to see the value in this method, realizing that people responded better to guidance than to rigid control. By late afternoon, the atmosphere at the dealership had shifted noticeably. Staff members were engaged, collaborating more effectively, and customers were met with attentive service. The manager had started to reflect deeply on his own behavior, recognizing that his assumptions had limited not only his perspective, but also the potential of the team. He understood that real leadership required openness, empathy, and a willingness to confront personal biases. The owner spent some time one-on-one with the manager, discussing strategies for improvement and offering support. He encouraged the manager to embrace learning opportunities, to seek feedback, and to foster an inclusive environment. The conversation was candid, yet respectful, allowing the manager to confront his mistakes without shame or fear. The dialogue planted seeds of growth and transformation, demonstrating that accountability and guidance could coexist. As the day ended, the owner walked through the dealership one last time, observing the polished cars, the satisfied customers, and the energized staff. The transformation was subtle but significant. The tone of the environment had shifted from tension and hierarchy to collaboration and respect. The manager, though still processing, felt a new sense of clarity and understanding. He recognized that his role had changed, not diminished, but redefined by the principles of thoughtful leadership. The owner left the dealership, walking calmly to his car. He reflected on the day's events, satisfied with the progress made. The confrontation had not been aggressive or hostile. It had been strategic, deliberate, and human-centric. By maintaining patience, observation, and empathy, he had not only addressed a personal slight but had also begun to transform the culture of the dealership. He knew the journey was far from over. Change required consistency, ongoing guidance, and the cultivation of trust. He had taken the first steps, but the real challenge lay ahead in sustaining this approach, ensuring that fairness, respect, and professionalism became ingrained in every interaction. He felt ready for this responsibility, confident in his approach, and aware of the impact patience and empathy could have on the people in the business. Back inside the dealership, the manager reviewed the day, reflecting on the owner's approach and the staff's reactions. He realized that authority without understanding was hollow, and that true leadership involved patience, reflection, and guidance. He made a mental note to adjust his behavior, to be more thoughtful, and to embrace the principles the owner had demonstrated. The employees, too, carried the energy of the day forward. Conversations were more collaborative, tasks were executed with greater attentiveness, and the overall mood was positive. They noticed the shift in the manager as well, seeing him approach situations with more reflection and care. The dealership, once a place of routine and rigid authority, was beginning to transform into an environment of respect, inclusivity, and collaboration. That night, the owner reflected on the encounter that had set this transformation in motion. He thought about how calm observation, strategic action, and empathy had changed the course of events. The irony of the previous day, when he had been dismissed and underestimated, was not lost on him. Yet he felt no bitterness. Instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that leadership and change could be achieved without conflict. Through patience and thoughtful guidance, he planned for the days ahead, considering training programs, employee engagement strategies, and methods to sustain the positive culture he was cultivating. He understood that leadership was a continuous process, requiring attention to detail, empathy, and the ability to inspire trust. The lessons of the confrontation, the revelation, and the first day of transformation would serve as the foundation for long-term success. The night settled over the city, lights flickering in windows and streets bustling with life. The dealership, too, had its own rhythm, a quiet energy that promised growth, learning, and transformation. The owner felt prepared, aware, and committed. He knew that the journey of leadership, while challenging, was meaningful and rewarding. The confrontation had revealed truths, the revelation had shifted authority, and the first steps of transformation had begun. And so, the third part of the story closes with a sense of growth and anticipation. The confrontation has been met with calm guidance, leadership principles are taking root, and the dealership stands at the threshold of meaningful change. The journey ahead is clear, and the man's approach promises to transform not just the business, but the people within it, creating a lasting impact based on patience, respect, and human-centered leadership. The morning after the first day of transformation, the dealership felt noticeably different. The employees moved with renewed energy, talking to each other more openly and coordinating tasks with a sense of collaboration rather than just following instructions. Even the air seemed lighter, as if the atmosphere itself had shifted. The manager arrived early, carrying a mix of apprehension and curiosity. He had spent the night reflecting on the owner's guidance and his own behavior. The confrontation from the previous day weighed on him, but it also sparked a determination to grow. The owner arrived soon after, greeting each employee warmly. He made a point to notice the small details, the care with which cars were polished, the smiles exchanged among staff, and the subtle changes in attitude from the manager. He understood that true transformation was gradual and required patience. Every action, no matter how minor, contributed to the culture he wanted to foster. He called for a brief team meeting in the middle of the morning. The employees gathered, curious but comfortable. The owner began by acknowledging their hard work and dedication. He emphasized that change was not about punishment or blame, but about creating a positive environment where everyone could thrive. He encouraged the manager to share his thoughts, giving him an opportunity to speak openly about his experiences, mistakes, and goals for improvement. The manager, though hesitant at first, began to speak. He admitted that he had judged too quickly, that assumptions had clouded his decisions, and that he wanted to do better. He acknowledged that leadership required self-awareness and humility, and he expressed a willingness to learn from the owner's example. The staff listened intently, sensing the sincerity in his voice. This moment marked a turning point, as the manager began to embrace the principles of fairness and empathy. The owner suggested practical steps for improvement, focusing on training, communication, and team engagement. He outlined a plan for workshops on customer service, diversity, and leadership skills. He encouraged employees to voice their opinions and contribute ideas for enhancing the workplace. By involving everyone, he reinforced the idea that change was a shared responsibility, not a top-down mandate. Throughout the day, the owner moved between employees and the manager, observing interactions, offering guidance, and acknowledging progress. He made it a point to provide constructive feedback in private, highlighting both strengths and areas for growth. The manager began to implement these suggestions, experimenting with new approaches to communication and leadership. He noticed that employees responded positively to guidance that was respectful and collaborative, rather than authoritarian. The owner also spent time engaging with customers. He listened carefully to their concerns, asked thoughtful questions, and ensured that their needs were met with professionalism and care. Staff observed his interactions, learning by example how empathy and attentiveness could enhance customer satisfaction. The manager saw the impact firsthand, realizing that leadership extended beyond managing employees. It also involved creating a positive experience for every person who entered the dealership. By mid-afternoon, the dealership's operations ran more smoothly. Tasks were completed efficiently, and the atmosphere was collaborative rather than tense. The manager began to appreciate the value of observation and patience, understanding that rushing to judgment could hinder both morale and performance. He reflected on how his own assumptions had affected employees and customers, and he resolved to maintain a more thoughtful approach moving forward. The owner introduced a system for regular feedback, encouraging employees to share their thoughts on workplace dynamics, customer interactions, and management practices. This allowed staff to feel heard and valued, fostering a culture of transparency and continuous improvement. The manager participated actively, learning to listen without interrupting, and to respond with guidance rather than criticism. As the day progressed, small successes reinforced the new culture. A team member suggested a more efficient way to organize paperwork, which was implemented immediately. Another employee proposed a customer engagement strategy that improved satisfaction. The manager recognized these contributions openly, giving credit where it was due. Employees felt empowered, realizing that their ideas mattered and that their voices were respected. The owner also emphasized the importance of fairness and equity. He reminded the team that assumptions based on appearance, background, or status had no place in the dealership. This message was reinforced through conversations, training sessions, and daily interactions. The manager absorbed this lesson, understanding that personal growth required confronting biases and embracing inclusivity. By evening, the dealership had transformed into a space where collaboration, respect, and professionalism guided every action. The manager reflected on the journey, acknowledging that change was challenging but rewarding. He appreciated the owner's calm and thoughtful approach, which had provided a model for leadership grounded in empathy and fairness. The employees, too, recognized the positive shift, feeling motivated and valued in their roles. The owner left the dealership with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that the foundations of transformation had been established. He understood that consistent effort, observation, and guidance would be necessary to sustain these changes, but the initial progress was encouraging. The manager and employees had begun to embrace a new way of thinking, one that prioritized respect, collaboration, and continuous growth. At home, the owner reviewed the day, reflecting on the successes and challenges. He noted areas where further attention was needed, including communication between departments, training for new hires, and refining customer service protocols. He wrote detailed plans for the following weeks, ensuring that every aspect of the dealership's operations aligned with the values of fairness, empathy, and professionalism. The manager, meanwhile, stayed late to organize the day's work and review his own performance. He considered how his actions had affected others and how he could improve. He recognized that leadership was not about asserting dominance but about guiding, listening, and fostering growth. The lessons from the owner's approach would shape his behavior going forward, creating a more thoughtful and inclusive work environment. Over the next few days, the owner continued to implement changes gradually, reinforcing positive behaviors, addressing challenges with patience, and maintaining open lines of communication. Employees adapted to the new culture, feeling supported and empowered. The manager grew more confident in his role as a leader, balancing authority with empathy and understanding. The dealership became a place where collaboration, respect, and fairness were central to every interaction. The transformation extended beyond the internal dynamics of the dealership. Customers noticed the improved service, the attentiveness of staff, and the overall atmosphere of professionalism and care. Positive feedback increased, and the reputation of the dealership began to grow. The owner's approach demonstrated that thoughtful leadership could create tangible results, benefiting employees, customers, and the business as a whole. By the end of the week, the manager had embraced a new perspective on leadership. He understood that personal growth required self-awareness, reflection, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. He appreciated the owner's guidance and example, recognizing the value of calm, strategic, and human-centered leadership. Employees felt more engaged, motivated, and respected, contributing ideas and participating actively in the dealership's success. The owner reflected on the journey, satisfied that the initial steps of transformation had been successful. He knew that ongoing effort and consistency were essential to maintaining the culture he had begun to cultivate. The dealership was no longer just a business. It was a space where respect, collaboration, and fairness guided every interaction. The manager and employees had begun to embrace these principles, creating a foundation for lasting change. And so, the fourth part of the story concludes with growth, reflection, and resolution. The dealership has begun to thrive under new leadership. The manager is learning and evolving, and the employees feel valued and empowered. The transformation, initiated by patience, observation, and human-centered guidance, promises continued progress, setting the stage for long-term success and positive impact for everyone involved. The days after the initial transformation were marked by steady progress. The dealership had changed, not through force or confrontation, but through patience, understanding, and thoughtful leadership. Employees moved through their tasks with confidence, knowing that their voices mattered and that their efforts were recognized. The manager, once rigid and defensive, had grown into a more reflective and supportive leader. He approached each interaction with consideration, balancing authority with empathy. The owner observed these changes with satisfaction. He understood that true leadership was not about control, but about fostering an environment where everyone could contribute, grow, and feel respected. He continued to monitor operations carefully, providing guidance and ensuring that the principles of fairness, inclusivity, and professionalism were maintained. Small improvements compounded, creating a ripple effect that strengthened the overall culture of the dealership. Customers began to notice the shift as well. Their experiences were more positive, interactions were smoother, and their needs were met with attentiveness and care. The reputation of the dealership grew steadily, fueled by word of mouth and genuine customer satisfaction. Employees felt proud to be part of an organization that valued respect and collaboration, and the manager gained confidence in implementing new ideas and approaches that reflected these values. One morning, the owner called for a team meeting. Everyone gathered, curious and attentive. He spoke about the journey so far, acknowledging the challenges they had faced and the progress they had made. He emphasized that the growth of the dealership depended on each individual, and that continued success required ongoing effort, communication, and support for one another. The manager sitting beside him nodded, reflecting on how far he had come in understanding what leadership truly meant. The owner encouraged employees to share their experiences and insights, and many spoke about the positive changes they had noticed in the workplace. They mentioned improved teamwork, clearer communication, and a more inclusive environment. The manager listened, appreciating the feedback and recognizing that leadership was an evolving process. He had learned that listening and adapting were as important as guiding and directing. Throughout the day, the owner moved among staff and customers, offering guidance, answering questions, and observing the flow of operations. He noticed moments of collaboration, small acts of kindness, and innovative ideas being implemented. The manager joined in, providing support and learning how to apply the principles he had observed. Together, they were creating a culture that was both efficient and humane. As weeks passed, the dealership became a model of positive transformation. Employee engagement increased, customer satisfaction soared, and the workplace culture strengthened. The manager continued to embrace reflection, humility, and empathy, building stronger relationships with both staff and customers. The owner's patient and strategic approach had created an environment where growth was possible for everyone. The owner also introduced regular training sessions focused on personal development, customer service, and effective communication. Employees embraced these sessions, seeing them as opportunities to improve skills and contribute more effectively to the dealership. The manager participated actively, applying new strategies and mentoring staff members. His growth was evident, and his confidence was now balanced with understanding and care. The transformation extended beyond the immediate team. The dealership became known in the community not only for the quality of its cars, but also for the professionalism, respect, and fairness shown to every customer. Positive stories spread, attracting new clients and strengthening the reputation of the business. Employees felt pride in being part of an organization that reflected values they could respect and believe in. One day, the manager approached the owner privately. He expressed gratitude for the guidance, acknowledging that the lessons in patience, empathy, and leadership had profoundly affected him. He admitted that he had learned more in a few weeks than he had in years of experience. The owner listened, smiling, understanding that change often required someone to see the potential in another and guide them patiently. This moment symbolized the growth of both leaders, the owner as a mentor and the manager as a transformed professional. The dealership's culture continued to flourish. Employees supported one another, collaborated on problem-solving, and celebrated successes together. The manager now understood that leadership was about trust, respect, and guidance, not mere authority. He applied these principles consistently, fostering an environment where mistakes were opportunities for learning, and achievements were recognized and shared. The owner reflected on the journey, recognizing that the initial incident, when he had been dismissed and underestimated, had set in motion a transformation that went far beyond a personal slight. It had allowed him to demonstrate the power of calm, thoughtful leadership, and it had created a ripple effect that improved the lives of employees and customers alike. The irony of the situation, once sharp and amusing, had become a lesson in patience, resilience, and human-centered leadership. Weeks turned into months, and the dealership became a benchmark for excellence in management and customer service. The manager had fully embraced the principles he had once ignored, and his growth inspired others. Employees thrived in an environment that valued them, and customers felt respected and cared for. The owner continued to observe and guide, maintaining the culture of fairness and inclusivity that had transformed the business. The story of the dealership began to reach beyond its walls. People in the community shared experiences of positive interactions, attentive service, and a welcoming atmosphere. The owner and manager understood that true success was measured not only in sales, but in the respect, trust, and engagement of employees and customers. Their commitment to human-centered leadership had created lasting impact. At the end of a particularly busy week, the owner walked through the dealership, observing employees assisting customers, collaborating on tasks, and celebrating small victories. The manager stood nearby, engaged in conversation with a staff member, demonstrating patience and guidance. The atmosphere was filled with energy, respect, and positivity. The owner felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that the journey of transformation had been successful and meaningful. He paused for a moment, reflecting on the journey from the day he had been dismissed, underestimated, and judged unfairly. The incident, once a source of irony and tension, had become a catalyst for growth, learning, and positive change. He recognized the importance of patience, observation, and empathy in leadership. The manager had grown, the employees had thrived, and the dealership had become a model of fairness and professionalism. The owner considered the long-term impact of this journey. The lessons learned would not be forgotten, and the culture established would continue to influence the dealership for years to come. Employees would remember the importance of respect, collaboration, and continuous learning. Customers would continue to experience attentive and fair service. The manager would carry the principles of thoughtful leadership into future challenges. The dealership's story became a testament to the power of calm, patient, and human-centered leadership. The initial confrontation had been transformed into a lesson in growth and transformation, demonstrating that understanding and empathy could create lasting change. The owner's approach had not only addressed a personal slight, but it also reshaped an entire organization, fostering a culture of respect, inclusivity, and professionalism. As night fell, the dealership quieted. Lights reflected on polished cars, and the staff prepared to leave, satisfied with the day's work. The owner stepped outside, taking a deep breath, feeling a sense of accomplishment and hope. He knew the journey was ongoing, but the foundation had been laid. Leadership, patience, and empathy had created a space where people could thrive, learn, and grow. And so the fifth part of the story concludes with reflection, long-term impact, and hope. The dealership had been transformed, the manager had grown, and the employees and customers had benefited from human-centered leadership. The incident that began with misunderstanding had become a story of patience, growth, and meaningful change, leaving a lasting legacy for everyone involved.